My children thought I sold our 40-year-old family home because I was greedy. What they didn't know was that I had less than 6 months to live. I still remember the sound, not the laughter itself. The screen door slamming behind my son as he walked onto the back porch, the scrape of a chair across the old cedar deck. Someone opening another bottle of beer, then the laughter, not loud enough for the neighbors to hear, just loud enough for me. I was standing in the kitchen, rinsing coffee mugs that had belonged to my wife for almost 40 years. The window above the sink was cracked open, and every word drifted inside as clearly as if I had been sitting beside them. "They're really serious?" my daughter Emily asked. "I guess so," my son Mark answered. "He actually thinks someone is going to buy this place?" A few seconds of silence, then another laugh. "The roof's ancient," Mark said. "The plumbing barely works. Dad's being stubborn. Nobody's going to pay what he's asking." Emily laughed again. "Maybe when nobody buys it, he'll finally agree to move into assisted living." I kept washing the same mug. I don't remember how long I stood there. The water had already gone cold. That house wasn't just a house. It was the first thing Claire and I ever owned together. We bought it in 1983, back when interest rates were high, and we thought we'd made the biggest mistake of our lives. The kitchen had yellow wallpaper. The carpet smelled like cigarettes. The backyard looked more like a field than a lawn, but every paycheck, every Saturday morning, every vacation we never took went into fixing it. I built the deck with my father. Claire planted the maple tree beside the driveway the year Emily was born. When Mark arrived 3 years later, we buried a little glass jar beneath that tree with newspaper clippings, baby photos, and a letter we promised to open together one day. We never did. Life kept happening. College, jobs, grandchildren, retirement, cancer. The house stayed. Claire didn't. Hongrara. She'd been gone almost 3 years. People always tell you grief gets easier. Maybe. But easier isn't the same as smaller. Some mornings I'd still reach across the bed before remembering. Some evenings I'd cook too much pasta. On Sundays I'd set 2 coffee cups on the kitchen table before quietly putting one back into the cabinet. No one ever saw those moments. That's probably why everyone assumed I was doing just fine. After Claire died, the visits slowly changed. At first, the kids came every weekend, then every other weekend. Birthdays became phone calls. Pong calls became text messages. Eventually, I learned something strange. If I wanted to see my grandchildren, I had to ask several weeks in advance. Everyone was busy. Soccer practice, dance lessons, work deadlines, school projects. I believed them because they weren't lying. They were just living lives that no longer had much room for mine. Every Wednesday morning, I drove to the same little cafe 2 miles from the house. Not because the coffee was exceptional, because Doris worked there. She was 74, retired twice. Still insisted on working 3 mornings a week because, as she liked to say, someone has to keep these teenagers from burning the muffins. She'd lost her husband years before. Somehow she understood silence better than anyone else I knew. "You look tired," she said one morning. "I didn't sleep much. Wife again?" I nodded. She slid my coffee across the counter. "No charge today. You've said that 3 weeks in a row. I know. You'll go bankrupt." She smiled. "I've survived 3 husbands and 2 recessions." I laughed. "You only had 1 husband. The other 2 were bad dates." It felt good to laugh. Real laughter. Not the kind people use to fill empty space. One afternoon, Mark stopped by unexpectedly. He looked around the living room before sitting down. "You've got too much house, Dad. I've managed so far. You don't need 4 bedrooms. I know. You should think about downsizing." I have. His face brightened. "Really?" "Yes, I've decided to sell." He blinked. "Seriously?" "I've already spoken with a real estate agent." He smiled wider than I'd seen in months. "I think that's a great idea." He stood and hugged me. It was the first hug we'd shared in almost a year. For a second, I almost believed he was happy, because I'd made a decision that would make my life easier. Everything changed the following Sunday. Emily came over with her husband. Mark brought his family. The grandchildren ran through the backyard, the adults stayed inside. Someone eventually asked the question I'd been expecting. "So," Emily smiled, "what are you planning after you sell?" "I'm still deciding. You could move closer to one of us. Maybe. You've looked at retirement communities?" "A few." Mark leaned back in his chair. "You'll have a nice amount left after the sale." I looked at him. "What makes you think that?" He shrugged. "Just saying." Emily laughed. "You've earned it." Then she added something that stayed with me. "Although eventually it'll all come back to the family anyway." Nobody corrected her. Nobody even looked uncomfortable. The room simply became quiet. I don't think they realized what those words sounded like. Maybe they truly didn't. Maybe they were already thinking about inheritance, without meaning any harm. Maybe. But once a sentence enters your heart, it doesn't leave easily. That night I walked through every room in the house. Claire's sewing room, Mark's old bedroom, Emily's faded height marks still penciled onto the hallway wall, the garage where we'd taught both kids to ride bicycles, the attic filled with Christmas decorations we'd collected over 4 decades. Every room carried someone else's memories, everyone else's, except the future. There wasn't a single room in that house that belonged to tomorrow, only yesterday. 2 weeks later, the for sale sign appeared. The phone started ringing almost immediately. Apparently, the market was stronger than my children had imagined. When Mark saw the listing price online, he nearly choked. "Dad," he stared at the screen. "You're actually asking that much?" The agent suggested it. "No one's paying that." I simply smiled. "We'll see." 3 days later, we had our first offer, and by the end of the week, it was gone. Sold. For more than the asking price. The day I signed the papers, I stood alone in the empty living room. The echoes sounded different without furniture. I rested one hand against the wall, where the children's height marks still remained. I thought about asking the buyers if I could keep that small section of drywall. Instead, I took one photograph, folded it into my wallet, locked the front door, and walked away without looking back. The hardest part wasn't leaving the house. It was knowing that everyone I loved believed I'd made the wrong choice. None of them knew what I'd discovered 6 weeks earlier, and none of them could have guessed why. Selling that house had become the only decision I had left. 6 weeks earlier, I had gone in for what I thought would be another routine appointment. At 71, you collect doctors the way children collect baseball cards. A cardiologist, a dermatologist, an eye specialist who kept reminding me I needed brighter reading glasses. This appointment was with my family physician. Dr. Patel had treated Claire and me for nearly 20 years. He wasn't the kind of doctor who rushed people through the door. He remembered birthdays. He asked about grandchildren. He even remembered that Claire hated hospitals because she'd spent too much of her childhood in them. When he walked into the examination room that morning, he wasn't carrying his usual smile. "How have you been sleeping, Daniel?" "Not well, still losing weight." "A little." He looked down at the folder in his hands before meeting my eyes. "I'd like to run a few more tests." The tests led to scans. The scans led to specialists. The specialists spoke in careful sentences that never sounded as hopeful as they were trying to be. I sat in a small consultation room 3 weeks later while a young oncologist folded her hands together. "I'm afraid the biopsy confirmed it." She paused. "We've caught it later than we'd hoped." I didn't interrupt her, maybe because I already knew. Sometimes your body tells you the truth long before anyone else does. She explained treatment options. Percentages, timelines, appointments. I remember almost none of it. Only one sentence stayed with me. "You should spend your time on what matters most." Holmore. I drove home without turning on the radio. Halfway there, I pulled into the parking lot of a public library. Not because I needed a book, because I couldn't bring myself to pull into the driveway. When I finally did, the house looked exactly as it always had. The maple tree Claire planted, the porch swing I kept promising to repaint, the curtains she'd sewn herself. Everything looked permanent. Only I wasn't. That evening, I stood in our bedroom closet. Claire's blue cardigan was still hanging exactly where she'd left it. I had told everyone I wasn't ready to donate her clothes. That wasn't the whole truth. The truth was, as long as her sweaters remained in that closet, some part of me could pretend she had simply gone out for groceries. I rested my forehead against the closet door. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. The room stayed quiet. "Han Holgrimer." I decided not to tell the children. Not yet. People might call that a mistake. Maybe it was. But I'd watched Claire go through illness. I'd watched every conversation become about medication, appointments, and survival. She stopped being Claire. She became the patient. I couldn't bear the thought of living the rest of my days that way. I wanted to remain Dad, not a diagnosis. Instead, I met with an attorney, not to change my will, to ask a different question. If I sold my home, I asked, how long would it take to settle everything? The attorney looked surprised. "A few months, depending on the buyer." See, you planning to relocate?" "I'm planning." That was all I said over the next few weeks. Another realization quietly settled into my mind. The house had become a promise I could no longer keep. Every season it demanded something. The roof, the furnace, the gutters, the property taxes, the yard Claire used to help me maintain. Even if treatment went well, I couldn't realistically manage it forever. And if treatment didn't, I refused to leave my children with a house full of unfinished repairs, decades of forgotten boxes, and impossible decisions. I wanted to leave them something simpler than that, even if they couldn't understand it yet. The real estate agent, Melissa, walked through every room with a small notebook. She was probably in her early 40s, professional, calm, respectful. "This is a beautiful home." It was. She smiled gently. "It still is." She stopped in front of the hallway wall. "These height marks. My children. You keeping them? I wish I could." She didn't say anything after that. Some silences deserve respect. Honolgrulers, once the house sold, everyone suddenly became interested. Emily called twice in 1 week. Mark offered to help me apartment hunt. My grandson Tyler even texted me. "Grandpa, where are you moving?" I smiled at the message before replying. Somewhere smaller. That was true, just not the whole truth. A month after the sale closed, I moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. No stairs, no oversized yard, a balcony just large enough for 2 chairs and a few flower pots. The first morning there, I drank coffee while watching strangers walk their dogs below. For the first time in years, the house wasn't asking anything from me. No leaking faucet, no leaves to rake, no cracked fence. Just peace. It felt unfamiliar. Handurul. People assumed I had made a sacrifice. The truth was, I had bought myself something more valuable than square footage. Time, less cleaning, less maintenance, less worry. More mornings that belonged entirely to me. One Friday afternoon, Doris knocked on my apartment door carrying a paper bag. I brought blueberry muffins. "You baked?" "I bought them. That sounds more like you." She laughed. "I also brought napkins, so technically I contributed." We sat on the balcony while the sun settled behind the buildings. "This place suits you," she said. "I think so. You look lighter." "I feel lighter." She studied me for a moment. "There's something you're not saying." I looked down at my coffee. No. She didn't ask another question. That was one of the things I admired about her. She never forced people to hand over pain before they were ready. The following Monday, the hospital called. They had an earlier opening for treatment. I accepted it. When I hung up the phone, my apartment suddenly felt much quieter than before. Not lonely, just honest. There would be no more pretending. The journey had already begun, and sooner or later, my children were going to learn why I had sold the only home they'd ever known. The first treatment lasted nearly 5 hours. Most of it was waiting for blood work, waiting for medication, waiting for the IV bag to empty one slow drop at a time. I looked around the infusion room and realized something almost embarrassing. I wasn't the oldest person there. Across from me sat a man wearing a baseball cap, with a Navy veteran pin attached to the side. Beside the window, a woman knitted quietly while medicine dripped into her arm, as if she'd done it 100 times before. No one complained. People smiled when someone new walked in. They asked each other about grandchildren, dogs, weekend plans. Life hadn't stopped. It had simply become more precious. Angara, on my third visit, the seat beside mine was occupied by a woman reading a mystery novel. She lowered the book and smiled. First time? No. Third. I'm Susan. Daniel. She nodded toward my sandwich. They let you eat that? I hope so. If not, don't let the nurses catch you. I laughed. So you've become an expert? I've been coming here for 8 months. She said it so casually that it almost sounded like she was talking about a weekly book club. That stayed with me. People weren't just surviving here. They were still living. Honhongramas. When treatment ended that afternoon, I drove to the old neighborhood without really thinking about it. The new owners hadn't moved in yet. The driveway was empty. The sold sign was gone. I parked across the street. The maple tree still stood exactly where Claire had planted it. Its branches were fuller now than I'd ever seen them. For a long time, I simply watched the wind move through the leaves. I wasn't grieving the house anymore. I was thanking it. Some places carry you through an entire lifetime, then they quietly let you go. A week later, Emily called. Dad, dinner at our place Sunday. That sounds nice. You haven't visited since the move. I know. The kids miss you. I smiled. I miss them too. There was an awkward pause. Then she asked the question she'd clearly rehearsed. So, yes? What did you do with the money? I wasn't offended. Not anymore. People ask practical questions when they don't know which emotional ones to ask. I invested some. Oh, and I'm keeping enough to take care of myself. That's good. She sounded almost disappointed, only for a second, but I heard it. Sunday dinner felt strangely familiar. The grandchildren argued over board games. Emily cooked far too much food. Mark arrived 20 minutes late, blaming traffic that everyone knew didn't exist on a Sunday afternoon. Some habits never changed. After dessert, the grandchildren disappeared upstairs. The adults stayed around the table. Mark leaned forward. Dad, I wanted to ask you something. Go ahead. You've always said family should help family. I believe that. So, he rubbed the back of his neck. We've been thinking about buying a larger house. Emily looked down at her coffee. Mark continued, interest rates are rough. I knew where the conversation was headed before he did. We were wondering, if I could help? He looked relieved. Only if you're comfortable. I folded my napkin. I can't. The room became very still. Mark frowned. I thought the house sold for more than expected. It did. So, I said I can't. His expression changed, not angry, confused. You have the money. I also have medical bills. Emily looked up. Medical bills? I realized I'd said too much, or perhaps just enough. What medical bills? She asked again. I looked from one child to the other. Their faces had changed completely. The conversation about money had disappeared. Only concern remained. I could have lied. Instead, I took a slow breath. I've been receiving treatment. Neither of them spoke. For what? Emily whispered. Cancer. The word seemed to drain every sound from the room. Mark stared at me as though he'd forgotten how to blink. Emily's eyes immediately filled with tears. Since when? A little over 2 months? 2 months? Mark repeated. You knew for 2 months? I nodded. And you didn't tell us? I wasn't ready. Emily stood so suddenly that her chair tipped backward. You went through this alone? I wasn't alone. What does that mean? I had doctors, Dad. Her voice cracked. I meant us. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She wasn't the little girl who used to scrape her knees climbing the maple tree anymore. She was a frightened woman, wondering how she'd missed something so enormous. I know what you meant. Then why? I searched for words that wouldn't hurt more than the truth already had. Because every time we talked, I smiled sadly. We talked about the house. No one moved. No one defended themselves. I continued quietly. You wanted me to downsize. You wanted to know where I was moving. You wondered what I was doing with the money. But not once. I paused. Did anyone ask why I suddenly wanted to leave the home your mother and I spent 40 years building? Emily covered her mouth. Mark slowly lowered his eyes to the table. I kept waiting, I said softly. I honestly thought one of you would ask. Neither of them could meet my eyes. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. And for the first time in months, they finally understood that I hadn't sold the family home because I wanted a different life. I'd sold it because I didn't know how much of my life was left. Emily cried first, not loudly, not the way people cry in movies. She simply sat back down, covered her face with both hands, and whispered the same two words over and over. I'm sorry. Mark never said a word. He stared at the table as if the grain in the wood had suddenly become fascinating. Finally, he spoke. When did you find out? About 3 months ago. And treatment? I started shortly after selling the house. You've been driving yourself? Yes. You've been sitting in hospitals. He couldn't finish the sentence. Alone? I nodded once. I didn't want your lives to stop. Emily looked up, tears running freely now. Our lives? She asked. Dad, you are our life. I smiled gently. I used to believe that. The sentence wasn't meant to punish them. It simply came out as the truth. No one touched dessert again. The coffee grew cold. Even the grandchildren seemed to sense something had changed when they came downstairs. Tyler looked around the room. Is everything okay? Emily wiped her eyes before answering. We're just talking to Grandpa. He looked at me. You okay? I smiled. I will be. He accepted that answer. Children often do. Adults usually don't. Mark insisted on driving me home. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. Streetlights reflected across the windshield while soft jazz played from the radio. Finally, he turned the volume down. I've been a terrible son. I looked out the window. I don't think you're terrible. I've been selfish. You've been busy. That's not the same thing. No, it isn't. Another mile passed. I honestly thought you were selling because the house was too much work. It was. I never imagined. I know. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. I should have asked. I finally looked at him. Yes. I should have visited more. Yes. I should have noticed you were losing weight. Probably. His voice broke. I should have seen my own father. That sentence hurt more than anything he'd ever said before, because it wasn't defensive. It was honest. When we reached my apartment, he parked but didn't unlock the doors. I want to come with you next week. To where? Treatment. You don't have to. I know. I want to. For the first time in a long time, I believed him. The following Tuesday, Mark sat beside me in the infusion room. He looked uncomfortable at first, not because of the machines, because of the silence. He kept glancing around, unsure whether to speak. Susan noticed him almost immediately. She smiled. You must be family. I'm his son. It's about time. Mark looked confused. You know my dad. We've been treatment neighbors for weeks. She winked at me. He still tells terrible jokes. Mark laughed politely. Then he stopped. His smile disappeared. You've been coming here for weeks. He looked at me, and I didn't know. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Now you do. Underground, when the nurse came to connect the IV, Mark stood to one side. He watched every movement, every tube, every label, every quiet routine. It wasn't dramatic, no alarms, no emergencies. Just ordinary people quietly fighting for another ordinary day. On the drive home, he didn't turn on the radio. Halfway back, he said something that surprised me. I always thought courage looked different. What do you mean? I thought courage was... He searched for the word. Winning. I smiled. And now? I think courage looks like showing up. The weeks that followed slowly changed our family. Not overnight. Real families don't heal overnight. Emily began stopping by every Friday after work. Sometimes she brought groceries I didn't ask for. Sometimes she brought nothing except herself. We'd sit on the balcony drinking coffee while watching people walk their dogs below. One afternoon she looked around the apartment. I judge this place. I know. I thought you deserved something bigger. I laughed softly. I've had bigger. She smiled. I guess peace doesn't need 4 bedrooms. No, it doesn't. Tyler started visiting once a week at 16. He was at the age where most teenagers would rather be anywhere else. But every Wednesday he appeared at my door carrying 2 paper cups. Coffee? You know I'm paying eventually. You've been saying that for 2 months, and one day I'll mean it. He grinned. We started taking short walks after coffee. He asked questions no adult had asked in years. What was Mom like when she was my age? Did Grandma ever get angry? Were you scared when you became a dad? He wasn't interviewing me. He was collecting family stories, stories that might have disappeared if no one had asked. One Saturday, he surprised me. Grandpa, yeah, can we go see the old house? I looked at him. Why? I never really thanked it. The words caught me completely off guard. You thanked it. It gave us all our memories. We drove there that afternoon. The new owners had planted fresh flowers along the front walkway. Children's bicycles rested beside the garage. Lotta floated through the open kitchen window. Not ours, someone else's, exactly as it should be. Tyler stood quietly beside me. I used to think it belonged to our family. I smiled. It never did. What do you mean? We belonged to it for a little while. He nodded slowly. I think I understand. So do I. We turned back toward the car. Neither of us looked back. We didn't need to. Some goodbyes are finally complete. For the first time since Claire died, I wasn't carrying the weight alone. Not because the cancer had become easier. It hadn't. Some mornings I still woke up exhausted before the day even began. Some treatments left a metallic taste in my mouth that lasted for days. There were afternoons when climbing one flight of stairs felt like hiking a mountain. But now, someone always called. Someone always knocked. Someone always asked how I was feeling. It was strange. For months I'd wanted exactly that. Now that it was happening, I realized something important. Love doesn't disappear overnight. Attention does. And sometimes people don't realize the difference until they're forced to. Andaraza, one evening Emily arrived carrying a cardboard box. I found these in our attic. She placed it on my kitchen table. Inside were old photo albums. Claire had labeled every single one in neat handwriting. Summer Vacation 1994, Mark's Graduation, Emily's. Wedding Christmas Memories. Emily opened one album. The first photograph showed Claire kneeling in the garden, dirt on her jeans, laughing because I had accidentally sprayed both of us with the garden hose. Emily smiled through tears. I'd forgotten this. I hadn't. We spent almost 3 hours turning pages, not rushing, just remembering. Halfway through one album, Emily stopped. What? She held up a picture of me teaching Mark to paint the fence. I don't remember Dad looking this young. I laughed. I don't remember having that much hair. She laughed too, then her smile faded. I've spent years looking forward. She gently touched the photograph. I forgot to look back. A few days later, Mark called. Dad, everything okay? I need your help. I smiled. That's a first. I'm serious. So am I. He laughed. Then his voice became quieter. I've been thinking about the house, the old one? Yeah. I keep wondering why I cared so much. What do you mean? I wasn't thinking about you. He paused. I was thinking about what it represented. The inheritance. Yes, he didn't try to soften the word. I convinced myself it was family security. But it wasn't, it was money. His honesty surprised me. I hate admitting that. I know. I've apologized 100 times in my head. You only need to do it once. Silence. Then, I'm sorry, Dad. Not for selling the house. Not for the conversations. Not even for asking about the money. He was apologizing for forgetting the man behind the decision. I closed my eyes. I forgive you. There wasn't a dramatic pause. No emotional speech. Just two ordinary sentences. Sometimes, those are the hardest ones to say. Treatment continued through autumn. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. One scan looked encouraging. Another was less clear. Life became measured in appointments instead of months. Oddly enough, that made every ordinary day feel extraordinary. Coffee on the balcony. Watching autumn leaves collect along the sidewalks. A phone call from Tyler asking if I wanted to watch his soccer game. Emily dropping off homemade soup. Mark fixing a loose cabinet door I'd been ignoring. None of those moments would have made the evening news, but they became the richest part of my life. Just before Thanksgiving, Tyler appeared at my apartment carrying an old shovel. You ready? For what? He grinned. I found something. He drove us to the old neighborhood. The new owners were outside hanging holiday lights. Tyler walked over and introduced himself. A few minutes later, he came back smiling. They said it's okay. Okay for what? He pointed toward the maple tree, the time capsule. For a second, I'd completely forgotten. The glass jar, the one Claire and I had buried when Mark was born. 40 years earlier, I looked at the tree. I don't even know if it's still there. Only one way to find out. We dug carefully. The soil was harder than I remembered. About 20 minutes later, the shovel struck glass. Tyler looked at me with the biggest smile I'd seen in years. You were right. No, I whispered. Your grandmother was. Back at my apartment, we washed the dirt from the old jar. The lid was rusted shut. Inside, everything had survived. Tiny baby photographs. A newspaper dated 1986. A toy car, a hospital bracelet. And one folded letter, Claire's handwritten. She had written it for a future we were finally living. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. It began simply. If you're reading this, it means time has moved faster than we expected. I smiled through tears. That sounded exactly like her. The letter wasn't about money or the house or possessions. It was about family. She wrote that homes would eventually be sold. Children would grow up. Furniture would be replaced. Photographs would fade. But if our children remember how they were loved, she wrote, then we have left them everything worth inheriting. I couldn't continue reading for several seconds. Tyler quietly reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Claire somehow had, even after all those years. Christmas arrived with snow lightly covering the sidewalks. Emily insisted everyone gather at my apartment. It's smaller, she admitted, but it feels warmer. The grandchildren filled every corner with wrapping paper and laughter. Someone burned the dinner rolls. Mark blamed the oven. Emily blamed Mark. The children blamed the dog. It felt wonderfully normal. After dinner, Tyler stood up holding a small framed photograph. It was the picture I'd taken on the last day inside the family home. The hallway wall, the children's height marks. He had written something beneath it. Home was never the house. Home was the man who built it. I couldn't speak, not because I was sad, because I had spent months believing my family had forgotten what truly mattered. Looking around that tiny apartment, I realized they hadn't forgotten forever. They had simply remembered too late to save the house, but not too late to save us. Spring arrived before I noticed. The maple trees throughout the city began turning green again. One afternoon, after another follow-up appointment, Dr. Patel smiled as he closed my file. We're making progress. I raised an eyebrow. That's doctor language. He laughed. It means the treatment is working better than we expected. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. There were no guarantees. Life doesn't give those. But for the first time in a long while, there was hope. People still ask me whether I regret selling the family home. The answer surprises them: no. I miss it. I honor it. I thank it. But I don't regret leaving it. Because walls can protect a family, they can't hold one together. The day I sold that house, my children thought I was giving away their past. Months later, they finally understood I was trying to protect their future. And if I learned anything through all of it, it's this: a family's greatest inheritance is never the home that's left behind. It's the chance to love each other before it's too late. If this story touched your heart, take a moment today to call someone you love. Sometimes one conversation can mean more than we realize. And if stories like this remind you what truly matters, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more waiting for you.